Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Monday, December 29th, 2025. We're almost ending the first year now of the Dr. J Vlog series, and we have a special edition, shall we say. We're going to be doing a lot of what I call the Dr. J Thoughts and Reflections. So this will be episode 1 in that regard, and the title being The Season of Giving, because it's the season of giving as we close out 2025. And I'd like you to ponder the question, are you mainly a giver or a taker? Comes up often in literature and the arts and so forth. But of course, we can be both, depending on the situation. We can be kind and generous, but we can also be selfish and self-serving. In fact, sometimes we really do need to focus on ourselves and be takers, if you will, for our own well-being or very survival. We need to take our medicine, for example, or take a bath, or take a vacation, or take some time off, or in general, we need to take care of ourselves, and so on. But do you see yourself mainly as a giver or a taker? And you know others who seem to be mainly givers or takers for that matter. Humans obviously vary in their generosity, and especially in terms of their abilities to give unconditionally. And some people are remarkably generous, while others are not. Well, if not greedy, at least they're not inclined to help others out all that often. And there are many reasons for these differences, ranging from personality factors to our upbringings to simply our current living circumstances. And let's be clear here, we all have limited resources, no matter what our capacities for giving. Even if I genuinely wanted to spend most of my time every day, giving money away, well, I'd quickly run out, and probably you as well. In fact, we might note that some people are even generous to a fault, the expression, and need to scale back their altruism perhaps for their very own well-being. In fact, we all have to be judicious and, dare I say, discriminating in terms of our giving. There's an old expression that charity starts at home. And that's probably true for most people. Nearly everyone does more, shares more, and sacrifices more for their immediate family members than just about anyone else. But then people often give back in a variety of ways too, to their neighbors, to their communities, as well as charitable causes in general, which can include everything from blood donations to famine relief and much more. But there's one resource, at least from a practical or a daily living perspective, that arguably stands above all others. That is our financial resources, our money. After all, we do live in a capitalist, money-based economy. We all need money to survive. Whether in terms of cash or credit or even Bitcoin these days, we're daily engaging in countless cash and credit exchanges and e-transfers and so on. But other than yourself, whom have you known to be an incredibly generous person with their money in your life? Oftentimes we'll find such people in our immediate families, like a parent. Was your mother perhaps such a person? Mine was, as was her mother, my grandmother, Nana. And I noticed that from an early age, but then throughout the rest of our lives as well. She wasn't someone who signed up necessarily to do charitable work, but if someone beyond our family needed help, she'd try to find a way to contribute. She gave money to charitable causes to some extent, but her big thing was as if she actually saw someone in need. She often felt compelled to step up. One of the best examples that I recall was when a man that my brother employed at his company ended up taking his own life for various reasons. And he left a wife and 6 adopted children behind, who struggled mightily to make ends meet thereafter. My mother knew the family, though, and she decided then she would become a monthly contributor. And she decided to send the mother of the 6 children $100 each month just to try to help her out. They got help from various other sources as well, including some insurance money, some government sources, and so on. But my mother took it upon herself then to become kind of like a permanent monthly contributor and kept sending the widowed mother of 6 $100 each and every month for several years. Not everyone, probably not that many people would necessarily do that. I mean, just voluntarily giving out a good chunk of their money, giving it away each month to help a family, say, other than your own, to survive. But of course, many have done that and do those sorts of things. My mother was one of them. And sure, maybe like me, you've done your fair share of, monthly contributions to certain charitable causes. Like I would help needy children, or I've donated, sometimes I would donate regularly to the Christian Children's Fund, or to, again, other, to deal with it. My big thing was always dealing with world hunger. So I've made, I don't know how many contributions in that regard. And more recently, I've been making some contributions to, I established some scholarships a couple years ago, actually about 5 years ago now. Anyway, and so I've been contributing to those scholarships, and then another one that was created by a family who'd lost their son. So, and that just comes directly out of my paycheck. So it's not a brag of any kind I'm suggesting here, but these are just modest contributions from someone, myself, who has no problems paying the bills each month. And I get a tax credit for these donations too. But I realized that some time ago that there's a lot more that I could be doing, precisely because I haven't struggled financially since I was quite young. Even back then, I was fortunate that I was able to earn a decent living or a decent wage and generally pay the bills. I've never been rich per se, but I've never been destitute or homeless either. And this eventually led to a very different orientation toward money as I've gotten older. There was an expression that my father used to love to quote, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no brains. Something like that, end quote. So interpret that as you like. But the main point in my view is that it's a lot easier than to be, free and generous with our money and our resources when we're young and when we don't have too many debts and obligations. And then the implication was that as we age, we should grow to be a bit more financially conservative, since we perhaps start to have families, buy houses, and much more. And so as we get older, we find that we are tied down to a slew of responsibilities that we didn't necessarily have when we were younger. And if we're smart, we'd be fiscal conservatives, even if we wanted to continue to be social liberals, shall we say. But that never really happened to me. In fact, while I've always tracked the flow of resources in my own case to pay the bills, and I've occasionally dabbled in some investing, I've come to be even more liberal with age, not conservative. So I must have no brains. And in fact, if anything, I think I've become something of a radical when it comes to money, almost to the point of hypocrisy. What do I mean by that? Well, we'll tell our sons to try to put aside some money, to be responsible with their finances, to be disciplined, help them sort of invest in their own long-term well-being and financial security and so on. In many ways, we're often trying to teach our children to be fiscal conservatives, to be responsible. And yet my wife and I often end up not being fiscal conservatives. We'll try to help our 5 boys on occasion, and we'll also spend the money more freely on the kinds of causes in which we believe. After all, we have more disposable income these days, now that we're in our 50s and early 60s in my case. And so I've struggled for years with that tension, because there's a part of me that learned from my parents, who both grew up poor and survived the Great Depression and so on. But, I learned from them that it was important to try to manage your money, to look after yourself, to look after your own affairs, right? And we really didn't, have a lot of extra money even when I was growing up. We weren't poor, by the way. I didn't grow up poor by any stretch. But we were taught that we needed a good education, we needed to get a good job, buy a house, put away money each month, and so on. And yet, as I've gotten older, I've started to doubt the logic, if you will, more specifically, of just growing my own investments or my bank account. Now, let me explain that. In fact, the great irony is that we really did have to watch our pennies when the kids were younger. We didn't make as much money. We didn't have, much extra for many years. And in fact, like most people, we just basically wanted to keep the kids healthy and happy, a roof over our heads, etc. And hopefully, be able to take maybe a nice holiday once a year, that sort of thing. And now, decades later, we make much more money than we did when we were younger. The kids have all grown and they're on their own. And I'm a university professor, and I don't make big bucks, or I get the huge year-end bonuses for what I do. But my salary's fine, and it's much higher, and it's much more, I should say, than what I actually need to live on these days. So our financial advisor and all the smart, reasonable people out there stress, well, that's great, right? That's a good thing. Why not invest? Why not grow our nest egg, our portfolio, use the extra funds to set ourselves up nicely so that we'll have a comfortable retirement and hopefully never have to worry. We've earned it, right? And that all makes sense. And then hopefully the idea is that we'd be able to retire, have enough money in the bank and other assets like property, and then basically never have to worry about money or burdening our children if we become infirm as we age. And here's the thing. I see the money in the bank accounts. We have the portfolio, some investments, etc. And we have our monthly accounts, our checking accounts, just like most middle-class folks do. And yet, when I have money in my account, a curious thing happens. I feel like I should be putting that money to some good use. Sometimes, certainly for ourselves, we might need to do some things. Sometimes for our children. Why wait until we're deceased and then give them the money when they're in their 60s or whatever, right? They need help now. And sometimes, of course, for others in the community or for charitable causes. In effect, I think what's the good of the money, just sitting there in the bank, in the account? And it's not that I feel guilty or undeserving. I'm no problem taking the money that I get from my job, the direct deposit each month. And I have no problem accepting from the money that I would do for work on the side. But here's the point. Once I've done my work and paid the bills and taken care of my own financial obligations, I then think, well, now what? Who needs help? What can I do for others? What can I do with my good fortune? Sure, for a few moments, I sometimes like seeing the bank account grow, but not for the reasons that I think, that most people might think. And it's not because I think, wow, look how rich I'm getting. And it's not because of any validation of my success that the money might bring. And it's not even for that sense of relief of knowing that I have some money in the bank for an emergency, although that's not a bad thing either. So, and in fact, if I woke up tomorrow and I suddenly had $1 million in my checking account, that'd be awesome. If the rich Nigerian prince who's been contacting me for many years by email, if that Nigerian prince finally randomly decided to actually e-transfer me, $5 million, great. Or if some unknown, wealthy, recently deceased relative left me $5 million, that'd be pretty exciting. But you know what I've learned? Once I've got an extra chunk of money, I start thinking, what can I do with this? In my simplest and most naive moments, I actually think, well, who can I give this money to? And not by flipping $20 from my wad randomly on the streets, although that'd be kind of fun. But I think in terms of, well, who might need help? Where could I send the money that might make a real difference in the world or in someone's life? In short, I've learned that I genuinely do not care about the money per se, at least in the conventional ways that our culture prescribes. I'm certainly part of that culture. I'm part of the economy. I know that I need to have and I use the money. But as mentioned, once my financial obligations have been met, I have really no interest in growing my own personal wealth, shall we say, or accumulating more income. And in fact, if I've got too much extra money in the bank, I start thinking it's just a waste to be sitting there. Why not direct the money to someone or to an organization where it'll do some good, or even just to our own kids for that matter? But I'm not doing it from a feel good or hoping that I'll be praised for my generosity or for the endorphins that might be released. But rather, I take a much more of a Mr. Spock or a Star Trek perspective, right? It's a matter of logic and directing the resources to places and spaces where they're most needed, where they could do some real good. So simply put, there are a lot more people and causes out there that need my money than I do. Okay, but there's a problem, Mr. Spock or Dr. J. You might need those resources yourself someday. So what are you going to do if you're retired and then tragically you run out of money? You have to protect yourself and your own interests. You're being foolish and irresponsible, maybe even selfish, if you end up burdening your own children down the road. Perhaps. But I don't think so. So here's the wisdom, ultimately, that I'd like to share today. If we've lived a good life, if we've strived to be generous with our time and with our resources, with our money, and if we've given of ourselves as often as possible, why should we be worried, and especially about money? To the contrary, I'd expect we'd be far richer because of the relationships we've forged, the connections we've made, both near and far. And I have to trust that things will work out because we've tried to be kind and generous. And such people are basically never alone, at least in my view. So, in fact, I know this to be true. My mother was definitely not alone at the end of her life last year, not by a long shot. And my wife is perhaps even more generous than my own mother. It's probably in the 99th percentile of people that I know personally who are true givers of their time and energy and love and money. And not surprisingly, she probably has more people in her life than just about anybody else I know. And my goodness, if anything happened to her, I can guarantee you that she'd have more people trying to help her or who remember what she'd done for them than just about anybody else I know. And I've told her, I definitely hope that I die first between the two of us for two important reasons. First, my Mr. Spock perspective. She helps so many more people than I do. And so logically, the world's better off having her around a few more years than yours truly. Not that it's a competition, but do you see my point? I mean, if we're going to strictly base the decision on how much good we each do in this world, well, it's no contest. I mean, I do my best, don't get me wrong, I try, but she's just an altruistic virtuoso, if you will. And she brightens up so many, many more lives and so effortlessly in comparison with yours truly. And then there's a second, more selfish reason I hope to pass first. I don't want to be saddled with trying to handle the sheer magnitude of her funeral, the hundreds, perhaps even thousands of condolences and well-wishers and all the planning that would have to be involved. I figure my funeral would be a much smaller, more intimate affair and much easier to manage by comparison. No cap. The final thought. So look, I understand a lot of people like to make money. It's sort of built into the DNA of our culture, right? And we certainly like to have money in our accounts. And in fact, as best we can determine from the research, a majority of people actually work or they're motivated, I should say, mainly by the money that they can get from their jobs, so more than just about anything else. But then what that money means, of course, varies considerably to each person. So I'd like to have a lot of money too. It's just that I honestly really don't want the money for myself. I mean, what am I going to do with it? If I can buy pizza occasionally, I'm pretty doggone happy. Or if I need a new pair of jeans when my old ones have worn out, again, I'm pretty happy. I love a Ferrari or a Camaro or really cool cars and that sort of thing. I've always liked the cars, but I don't really care to ever own one. It's just not that important to me. If I have a warm bed to sleep in each night with my wife, well, again, I'm pretty happy. We just happen to have a nicer house nowadays than we used to have because we have more money. And with a bigger house, though, we're also fortunate in that we can take in other people on occasion to help them out. And you've heard me talk about this a little bit from previous vlogs too. And so that's literally what we can do by having a bit more money or a bigger space. So in the end, I mainly like to have the money because there's just so much more we can do with that money. And if nothing else, I'd imagine it would be a real kick if I could walk around, just randomly in the community around London where we live and hand out $100 bills to people who maybe aren't all that wealthy, right? Or don't have a place to stay, or they don't have great paying jobs, or they're just down on their luck, whatever the case might be. Okay, and it's like what happened literally when we walked out of a Chinese restaurant last year. Okay, and we walked past a guy. He was down on his luck. He was holding his sign a sign asking for money in the parking lot. And my wife naturally went to the car where she'd left her purse, and she pulled out $20. And I ran up to catch up to her, and I said, "What are you doing?" She instructed me to give the $20 to the fellow with the sign. Right? Now, we don't have unlimited resources, so I'm thinking, well, hey, what's wrong with giving $5, maybe even $10? But she insisted on the 20. And of course, she was right. I mean, whether it's $5 or $20, we weren't really going to notice that the next day. It wasn't going to make much of a difference in our lives. But for that fellow, man, his smile revealed that he felt like he just won the lottery. And I'm selfish because that made me really happy too. So just like I hope that these vlogs inspire or bring a smile or positive thoughts to those who choose to listen. And so I'll leave it at that for today. But as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs, if not 20s or $100 bills in abundance, whatever you can afford. It makes a difference. Peace. We'll see you next time.